My family kicked me to the streets, called me a thief, and I ended up serving pancakes at a roadside diner in Phoenix. But that old man sitting in booth 7, the one my ex-husband just humiliated, was about to change everything. Before we continue, comment where you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching. The smell of burnt coffee and bacon grease had become my perfume. 8 months of waking up at 4:30 a.m., tying on a stained apron, and smiling at strangers who left $2 tips on $40 tabs. My name tag said Sam, because Samantha felt like someone else. Someone who used to wear silk blouses and drive a BMW. Someone whose own mother hadn't called her a criminal. I was 32 years old, and I had $847 in my checking account. The diner, Rosie's Route 66, though Rosie had been dead for 15 years, sat on a stretch of highway between Phoenix and Tucson. We got truckers, tourists, and the occasional family arguing about whether to stop at the Grand Canyon. The vinyl booths were cracked. The jukebox hadn't worked since 2019. But the coffee was strong, and the tips were cash, and nobody asked questions about why a woman with a finance degree was refilling ketchup bottles at 6 a.m. I noticed the old man the moment he shuffled through the door. White hair like a dandelion gone to seed. Clothes that looked like they'd been pulled from a donation bin. A flannel shirt with a frayed collar. Khaki pants that were too big. Scuffed brown shoes. He moved slowly, leaning on a wooden cane that had seen better decades. His face was weathered, deep lines carved around his eyes and mouth, but those eyes, pale blue and sharp, they were taking in everything. Morning. I grabbed a menu. Booth or counter? Booth, please. By the window, if you don't mind. His voice was gravelly but polite. I led him to booth 7, the one with the best view of the parking lot and the desert beyond. He settled in with the careful movements of someone whose joints had started betraying him. Black, and whatever pie you'd recommend. Apples fresh, made it myself. A smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. Then apple it is. I brought his coffee and pie, and he thanked me with a nod that felt almost formal. Old-fashioned. He pulled a newspaper from his coat pocket, an actual printed newspaper, the Arizona Republic, and began reading. I liked him immediately. He didn't try to make conversation, didn't stare at my chest, didn't complain about the temperature of his coffee. He just sat there, eating pie and reading about whatever crisis was unfolding in the world. The morning rush came and went. Truckers needing eggs and hash browns before hitting I-10. A family with 3 kids who spilled orange juice everywhere. 2 nurses ending their night shift, exhausted and quiet. I moved between tables on autopilot, refilling cups, clearing plates, calculating tips in my head. It was almost 10 a.m. when the door swung open and I felt my stomach drop. My ex-husband walked in like he owned the place. He was wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than I made in a month. His dark hair slicked back, his jaw set in that expression I used to find confident, and now recognized as arrogant. 2 other men flanked him, colleagues, judging by their similar suits and the way they laughed at something he said. One was tall and bald. The other had the nervous energy of someone trying too hard to impress. Brandon's eyes swept the diner and landed on me. His smile widened into something cruel. Well, well. He strolled toward the counter, his colleagues trailing behind. Look who's moved up in the world. I gripped the coffee pot. What are you doing here, Brandon? Passing through. Got a client meeting in Tucson. He looked around with theatrical disdain. I heard you'd fallen on hard times, Sam, but this is... Wow, this is really something. The bald man snickered. The nervous one looked uncomfortable. I'm working, I said flatly. If you want to order, sit down. If not, the door's behind you. Brandon leaned against the counter. He was close enough that I could smell his cologne. Tom Ford. $350 a bottle, I knew, because I'd bought it for him on our 3rd anniversary. You know, I told your mother about this. She didn't believe me. Said her daughter would never be serving hash browns to truckers. He tilted his head. But here you are. My mother and I don't speak. No, you don't. And whose fault is that? I said nothing. There was nothing to say. He'd won. He and my mother and my brother, they'd all won. They'd taken everything, painted me as the villain, and watched me fall. Anything I said now would just give him more ammunition. Brandon glanced around the diner, his gaze casual, dismissive. It landed on booth 7, on the old man with the newspaper. "Fantastic clientele you've got here," Brandon's voice carried, deliberately loud. "Very upscale." The old man didn't look up from his paper. "Leave the customers alone," I said. But Brandon was already walking toward booth 7, his colleagues following like well-trained dogs. He stopped at the edge of the table, looking down at the old man with that smile that had nothing to do with warmth. "Morning, Pops. You lost? The shelter's on 5th Street. The old man lowered his newspaper, those pale blue eyes fixed on Brandon without a trace of fear. "I'm exactly where I intend to be." "Sure you are." Brandon looked at his colleagues and laughed. "Hey, Sam, does he pay in nickels? Or do you let him work off his bill washing dishes?" My face burned. "Brandon, stop." "What? I'm just making conversation." He turned back to the old man. "That cane's something else. You find that in a dumpster too?" The old man's expression didn't change. "It was a gift." "Right." Brandon reached down and snatched the cane from where it leaned against the booth. The old man's hand shot out, but too slow. Brandon held the cane up, examining it with exaggerated interest. "Wow, this is actually kind of nice. Real wood. Carved handle." He looked at the old man. "Where'd someone like you get something like this?" "Please give that back." "Please give that back," Brandon mimicked in a whiny voice. His colleagues laughed. "Come on, Pops. I'm just looking." Something inside me snapped. "Brandon, give him his cane. Now." He ignored me. And then, God, I still can't believe he did it. Brandon kicked the cane. Just kicked it across the diner floor like it was garbage. The wooden cane clattered and skidded, coming to rest against the jukebox. The old man tried to stand, but without his support, he stumbled. I rushed forward, catching his arm before he could fall. "Get out," I said to Brandon. My voice was shaking. "Get out of this diner right now." Brandon laughed. "Or what? You'll call the cops? Report me for being mean to a homeless guy?" He straightened his suit jacket. "Face it, Sam. You can't do anything to me. You never could." The front door of the diner burst open. 4 men in black suits entered. They moved with military precision, fanning out, their eyes scanning the room. They weren't cops. Cops didn't wear suits like that, didn't move like that. These men looked like Secret Service. One of them, the leader, was already speaking into his sleeve. "Sir?" The leader addressed the old man. "Are you all right?" The old man straightened, and something shifted. The frail, shuffling vagrant was gone. In his place stood someone else entirely, shoulders back, chin lifted, a cold authority settling over his weathered features like a mask coming off. "I'm fine, Thomas." His voice had changed too, sharper, commanding, though we seemed to have a situation. 2 more men in suits entered through the back. A woman followed, elegant, 50s, carrying a leather briefcase. She surveyed the scene with the calculating gaze of a lawyer who'd seen everything. Brandon's face had gone white. "What? What is this?" The old man retrieved his cane. One of the suits had already picked it up and was handing it to him with a small bow, and walked toward Brandon. Each step was steady now, deliberate. No shuffle, no frailty. "My name," the old man said, "is Arthur Whitmore." Brandon's mouth opened. Closed, opened again. "Whitmore? As in Whitmore Industries, Whitmore Holdings, Whitmore Foundation." The old man's eyes were ice. "I believe you work for one of my subsidiary companies. Harrison Analytics?" Brandon looked like he was going to vomit. "Sir, Mr. Whitmore, I had no idea." "You didn't." Arthur Whitmore stopped directly in front of Brandon. Despite the height difference, Brandon was 6 feet tall. Whitmore was 5'8" at best. There was no question who held the power. You saw an old man in worn clothes, and you made assumptions. You humiliated him. You took his cane and threw it across the room. Whitmore's voice dropped. "And you did it to impress your colleagues and torment that woman." Brandon was trembling. Actually trembling. "Whitmore, I am so sorry. I didn't know. I never would have. Please." "You didn't know," Whitmore repeated. "Tell me, Mr. Mitchell." Brandon Mitchell. "Mitchell, would your behavior have been acceptable if I were actually homeless? If I were actually poor?" Brandon said nothing. Whitmore turned to the woman with the briefcase. Margaret, she stepped forward, opening the briefcase, producing a document and an expensive pen. Mitchell, I'm Margaret Chen, Chief Legal Counsel for Whitmore Holdings. This document confirms your termination from Harrison Analytics, effective immediately. It includes a non-disclosure agreement and a release of claims. Sign here, and you'll receive 2 weeks severance. Refuse, and you'll be escorted from the premises of any Whitmore-affiliated property by security, after we've contacted the Arizona Bar Association about your conduct. The bar? I'm not even a lawyer. No, but your firm's senior partner is. And he'll be very interested to hear how his associates behave when they think no one important is watching. Brandon signed. His hand was shaking so badly the signature was barely legible. Your colleagues as well, Whitmore said, glancing at the bald man and the nervous one. Consider this a learning experience. 3 signatures later, 3 men walked out of Rosie's Route 66 diner with their careers in ruins. Brandon didn't look at me. He couldn't. The diner was silent. The other customers, the nurses, a couple of truckers who'd been watching with open mouths, seemed frozen in place. Arthur Whitmore turned to me. Those pale blue eyes, sharp and clear, studied my face. You defended me, he said, before you knew who I was. He was being cruel. It didn't matter who you were. No. A small smile crossed his weathered features. It didn't. That's exactly the point. He reached into his pocket and produced a business card. Heavy stock, embossed letters. Whitmore Foundation, Phoenix. My assistant will call you tomorrow, Miss Reeves. I stared at him. How do you know my name? I know a great deal about you, Samantha. His voice softened, and for a moment he looked tired again. Not frail, but sad. More than you might think. Your father and I, well, that's a conversation for another time. He walked toward the door, his entourage falling into formation around him. At the threshold, he paused and looked back. The pie really was excellent. And then he was gone. I stood in the middle of the diner, holding a business card worth more than everything I owned, trying to understand what had just happened. My father had been dead for 23 years. He'd served in Vietnam, came home broken, died of a heart attack when I was 9. What could he possibly have to do with a billionaire in a Phoenix diner? The card felt heavy in my hand. The Whitmore Foundation. I'd heard of it. Everyone in Arizona had. They funded hospitals, scholarships, veterans programs. Arthur Whitmore was worth something like $4 billion, though he famously avoided publicity. And he knew my father. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my cramped studio apartment, staring at the water stain on the ceiling, turning that business card over and over in my fingers. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, 9 a.m. tomorrow. Whitmore Tower, 43rd floor. Dress comfortably. M. Sir Chen. I was either about to get the opportunity of a lifetime, or I was walking into something I didn't understand. With my luck, probably both. Whitmore Tower rose 47 stories above downtown Phoenix, all glass and steel catching the morning sun. I stood on the sidewalk in my best clothes, a gray blouse and black slacks I'd bought at Goodwill 3 months ago, feeling like a fraud. The lobby was marble and chrome, with a security desk that looked more intimidating than most police stations. I gave my name to the guard, and within 30 seconds, a young man in a tailored suit appeared to escort me to a private elevator. Whitmore is expecting you, he said. Nothing else, no small talk, no explanation. The elevator opened directly onto the 43rd floor. No hallway, no reception area. Just a vast office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The desert stretched beyond, browns and oranges fading into the haze. Arthur Whitmore stood by the window, his back to me. He was dressed differently today. Expensive gray suit, crisp white shirt, but I recognized his posture. Still commanding, still sharp. Samantha, he turned. Thank you for coming. I don't think I had much choice, Mr. Whitmore. A smile flickered across his face. Arthur, please. He gestured to a pair of leather armchairs arranged near the window. Sit. We have a great deal to discuss. I sat. He didn't. Instead, He walked to his desk and picked up a photograph in a silver frame. He studied it for a long moment before bringing it to me. "Do you recognize this man?" The photograph was old, faded around the edges. Two young soldiers in Vietnam-era fatigues stood arm in arm, grinning at the camera. The jungle behind them was dense, green, threatening. One of the soldiers was clearly Arthur Whitmore, younger, leaner, but those same pale eyes. The other, my breath caught. "That's my father, James Reeves, Sergeant First Class, 101st Airborne Division." Arthur's voice was soft. "We served together in 71 and 72. He was my squad leader, my friend, and he saved my life." I looked up at him. "He never mentioned you." "He wouldn't have." Arthur sat in the chair across from me. "What happened? It wasn't something either of us talked about. Ever." He paused. "Do you know how your father came home?" "Not really. He didn't talk about the war. Mom said he saw things he couldn't unsee. He had nightmares until the day he died." Arthur nodded slowly. "January 14th, 1972. Our patrol was ambushed outside a village called Bin Trang. 12 men. Within the first 30 seconds, 6 of them were dead. I took shrapnel in my leg, my back. I couldn't move. The Viet Cong were advancing. Your father—" He stopped. His jaw tightened. "Your father ran back for me, through the fire. He carried me 200 yards to cover, then went back for 2 more wounded men. By the time air support arrived, he'd made that run 4 times. I couldn't speak. My father, the quiet man who'd sat on the porch drinking coffee in the mornings, who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd never once raised his voice, had done that. He received the Silver Star," Arthur continued. "I made sure of it, but the medals never meant anything to him. He just wanted to come home and forget. He died when I was 9. I know. I was at the funeral, in the back. Your mother didn't know me and I didn't want to intrude." Arthur's eyes met mine. "I've been watching your family ever since. Quietly. From a distance. Waiting for the right moment to repay a debt that can never truly be repaid." The weight of his words settled over me. 50 years. He'd been watching for 50 years. "When I saw what happened to you," Arthur said, "when I learned what your family did, I couldn't stay silent anymore. My heart stopped." "What do you mean, what my family did?" Arthur reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a manila folder. He set it on the table between us. "Your father left a trust, $2,300,000, accumulated through life insurance, investments, and a settlement from the VA. You were the sole beneficiary. The trust was to be released to you on your 30th birthday." I stared at him. "That's impossible. There was no trust." My mother said. The folder sat there, innocuous and damning. I didn't want to touch it. I didn't want to know, but I reached out anyway, opened it, and started reading. The documents were dense with legal language, but the facts were clear enough. James Reeves had established a trust in 1985, 3 years before his death. The sole beneficiary, Samantha Marie Reeves. The trustee, Patricia Reeves, his wife, my mother, until Samantha reached the age of 30. On my 30th birthday, 2 years ago, the trust should have transferred to me. Instead, there was a series of documents, forged signatures, fraudulent withdrawal requests, fabricated expenses. Over the course of 18 months, $2.3 million had been drained from the trust and distributed to 3 accounts: my mother, my brother Kevin, my husband Brandon, ex-husband now, but we'd still been married when it happened. "They stole everything," I whispered. "Yes." Arthur's voice was steady. "And when you started asking questions about the trust, your 30th birthday, you tried to contact your father's old attorney. They panicked. Your brother accused you of embezzling from the family business. Your mother backed him up. Your husband filed for divorce, claiming you'd been hiding assets." I remembered those weeks, the confusion, the accusations that made no sense. My mother screaming at me, calling me ungrateful, demanding to know what I'd done with the money. Kevin showing the police forged documents with my signature. Brandon, my husband of 4 years, standing in our kitchen and saying he didn't know me anymore. They'd destroyed me, deliberately, methodically, to cover up what they'd stolen. I was investigated, I said. The police. Your brother has connections. The investigation was closed within 3 weeks. No charges filed. Against anyone. I closed the folder. My hands were trembling. Why are you telling me this? Arthur stood and walked back to the window. Because it's time for the truth. And because I have the resources to help you get justice. Justice? The word tasted bitter. My family stole my inheritance and made me a pariah. I lost everything. My home, my career, my reputation. My own mother won't return my calls. And you think justice is possible? I think it's inevitable. Arthur turned to face me. Here's what I'm proposing. My legal team will investigate. We have forensic accountants, private investigators, attorneys who specialize in fraud cases. We'll build a case so airtight that no connection your brother has will be able to make it disappear. And what do you want in return? Nothing. He paused. Well, one thing. I want to know that James Reeves's daughter got what was owed to her. That his legacy didn't end in betrayal and lies. I didn't trust it. Couldn't trust it. Nothing in my life had been given freely. Every gift had strings. But what choice did I have? Okay, I said. Where do we start? Arthur smiled. The first genuine smile I'd seen from him. We start with Brandon Mitchell. The investigation moved faster than I'd imagined possible. Margaret Chen, Arthur's legal counsel, assigned a team of 6 people to my case. Within 48 hours, they had subpoenaed bank records, obtained copies of the trust documents, and begun interviewing witnesses. Brandon, it turned out, was the weak link. He's terrified, Margaret told me 3 days later. We were in a conference room on the 41st floor, documents spread across the table. The termination from Harrison Analytics was just the beginning. Our investigators found irregularities in his financial records going back years, tax fraud, securities violations. He's facing potential federal charges that have nothing to do with your family's theft. I looked at the evidence laid out before me. Bank statements showing transfers from my trust to accounts in Brandon's name, emails between Brandon and Kevin discussing the inheritance problem, a recorded phone call, obtained through means Margaret didn't explain, in which my mother told Brandon to make sure Samantha never finds out. My own mother, planning my destruction. We have enough to approach Brandon with a deal, Margaret continued. He cooperates, testifies against your mother and brother, and we don't pursue the federal charges ourselves. We let him take his chances with the IRS instead of adding our weight to the case. You want him to flip. I want him to sing. Margaret's smile was thin. A man like Brandon will do anything to save himself. The question is whether you can stomach working with him. I thought about it. 4 years of marriage. The way he'd smiled at our wedding. The way he'd held my hand when we walked through our first apartment. All of it a lie. All of it building toward this moment. Him standing in our kitchen, divorce papers in hand, telling me I'd brought this on myself. Make the deal, I said. Brandon met with Margaret's team the next day. I watched through a one-way mirror as he sat at a conference table, sweating through his expensive shirt, while 2 attorneys laid out exactly how much trouble he was in. He broke within an hour. It was Patricia's idea, he said, his voice cracking. Patricia and Kevin. They came to me 6 months before Samantha's 30th birthday. Said there was money, a lot of money, and that if we worked together, we could all benefit. He wiped his forehead. I didn't even know about the trust until then. Samantha never mentioned it. Because she didn't know, Margaret said flatly. Right. Brandon nodded rapidly. Patricia controlled everything. She'd been bleeding the trust for years, small amounts, but it wasn't enough. Kevin's business was failing. I had debts. We needed the full amount. So you forged documents. Kevin did most of that. He has a guy, I don't know his name, who can replicate signatures. We created withdrawal requests, transfer orders, made it look like Samantha had authorized everything. And when she started asking questions, Brandon's face crumpled. Patricia panicked. She said we had to discredit Samantha before anyone believed her. Kevin planted evidence of embezzlement at his company. He stopped. I filed for divorce, made accusations about hidden assets. We all told the same story. You destroyed an innocent woman to cover your theft. I know. His voice was barely a whisper. I know what we did. I've known from the beginning. But Patricia, you don't understand what she's like. She doesn't forgive. She doesn't forget. When Kevin and I suggested maybe we'd gone too far, she said she'd burn us both before she'd let Samantha take anything that was hers. I stepped back from the mirror. My legs felt weak. My mother, not a victim of bad decisions or desperate circumstances, an architect of cruelty. She hadn't been protecting herself. She'd been eliminating me. Margaret emerged from the conference room 30 minutes later. Her expression was unreadable. We have enough, she said. Signed statements, documented evidence, and Brandon's agreement to testify. I can have your mother and brother arrested by the end of the week. Arrested. My mother in handcuffs. My brother in a holding cell. The family that had raised me, celebrated holidays with me, told me they loved me, facing criminal charges because of what they'd done. I should have felt triumph. I felt hollow. There's something else, Margaret said. She hesitated. The first time I'd ever seen her uncertain. Brandon mentioned that Patricia has been making plans, moving assets. He thinks she suspects something is coming. What kind of plans? He doesn't know specifically. But he said she's been meeting with a man named Gerald Foster. He's a specialist in offshore accounts, the kind of specialist people use when they're planning to disappear. My mother wasn't just a thief. She was planning to run. And if she ran before we could stop her, she'd take whatever was left of my inheritance, and any chance of justice with her. That night, I sat in Arthur's office as his team worked through the implications. The sun had set hours ago. The city glittered below us, indifferent to the drama unfolding 43 floors above. We need to move faster, Margaret said. If Patricia liquidates her assets and leaves the country, extradition becomes exponentially more complicated. How long do we have? Arthur asked. Days, maybe less. Brandon said she mentioned a trip to the Cayman Islands next week. That's not a vacation. Arthur turned to me. Samantha, this is your decision. We can proceed cautiously, build an airtight case, and risk your mother disappearing. Or we can move now, arrest her before she can run, and take our chances with a less complete case. I looked at the photograph on his desk. My father, young and smiling, his arm around the man who would become a billionaire. He'd run through fire to save his friends. He'd never asked for recognition. He'd just done what was right. Move now, I said, before she can hurt anyone else. Arthur nodded, picked up the phone. Thomas, initiate contact with the FBI. Tell them we have evidence of wire fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. And tell them the suspects may be fleeing the country. He hung up and met my eyes. It begins tomorrow. The FBI moved at 5:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. I wasn't there for the arrests. Margaret had been very clear about that. But I watched the aftermath unfold from a conference room at Whitmore Tower, surrounded by screens showing news footage and live feeds from unmarked surveillance vehicles. My mother's house first, the Colonial in Scottsdale where I'd grown up, with the rose garden she'd planted when I was 6, and the oak tree Kevin and I used to climb. 6 agents in tactical vests approached the front door while 4 more covered the back. The door opened. My mother stood there in a silk bathrobe, coffee cup in hand, her face shifting from confusion to fury to something I'd never seen before. They let her out in handcuffs. She was screaming. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew the tone. Indignation. Outrage. How dare they? Don't they know who I am? The neighbors were already emerging from their homes, phones out, recording everything. Kevin's apartment next. A high-rise in downtown Phoenix, the kind of place a successful businessman would live. Except Kevin's business had been failing for years, propped up by stolen money and creative accounting. He came out quietly, head down, shoulders slumped. He looked smaller than I remembered. Brandon was already in custody, cooperating, giving statements, signing documents. The deal Margaret had offered, testimony in exchange for reduced charges, had turned him into the prosecution's star witness. He would face consequences, but nothing like what awaited my mother and brother. The initial charges are wire fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit theft, Margaret explained, her voice calm and professional. Based on Brandon's testimony and the financial records, We expect additional charges to follow: tax evasion, money laundering, possibly elder financial abuse, given that your mother was the trustee of your father's estate. Elder financial abuse. The trust had been established for me, but technically, my father had been the one who'd earned that money, who'd suffered for it, who'd died before he could see it protect his daughter. My mother had violated his wishes, his legacy. What happens now? I asked. Arraignment within 48 hours. Your mother will almost certainly request bail. Given her financial resources and the evidence of flight risk, Gerald Foster, the Cayman Islands, I'd recommend the prosecution argue for denial. And if they grant bail? Margaret's expression didn't change. Then we monitor her very carefully. The arraignment took place Thursday morning. I sat in the back of the courtroom, wearing sunglasses and a hat, trying to be invisible. Margaret had advised against attending, but I needed to see it. Needed to see my mother in an orange jumpsuit, her wrists cuffed, her perfectly maintained facade crumbling. She spotted me anyway. Those sharp eyes, the ones I'd inherited, swept the courtroom and found me in seconds. The look she gave me wasn't anger or betrayal or even hatred. Pure, undiluted contempt, as if I were something beneath her, as if everything she'd done, the theft, the lies, the destruction of my life, had been my fault, as if I deserved it. I held her gaze until she looked away. The judge denied bail. Flight risk, substantial assets, evidence of plans to leave the country. My mother would wait for trial in the Maricopa County Jail. Kevin, too, was denied. The judge noted that he'd been instrumental in facilitating his mother's schemes. As they led her out, my mother turned one last time. "This isn't over, Samantha," she called. "You think you've won? You don't know anything. You never did." The bailiffs pulled her through the door. It slammed shut behind her. I sat in the empty courtroom for a long time after everyone left. The question haunted me. My mother wasn't the type to make empty threats. If she said I didn't know something, she meant it. There was another layer to this story, something I hadn't uncovered yet. I called Margaret from the car. "I need access to everything," I said. "Every document, every email, every financial record. There's something else going on. Something my mother thinks will change things. Samantha, the case is solid. Brandon's testimony alone. She was too confident. Even in handcuffs, she was too confident. There's something we're missing." A long pause. "I'll have the files sent to your apartment." The files arrived that evening. 12 boxes of documents covering 20 years of my family's finances. Bank statements, tax returns, business records, personal correspondence. I spread them across my apartment floor and began reading. At 2 a.m., I found it. A letter, dated 3 months before my 30th birthday. My mother had written it to Kevin, complaining about the situation with James's money. Most of it was what I expected: greed, entitlement, resentment that my father had left everything to me instead of her. But one paragraph stopped me cold. "She doesn't deserve any of it. She's not even James's real daughter. I've kept the secret for 32 years, and I'll keep it forever if I have to. That money belongs to this family, to us, not to some stranger's child." I read it again, and again. The words didn't change. Not James's real daughter, some stranger's child. My father, the man in the photograph, the hero who'd run through fire, the quiet presence who'd held me when I had nightmares, wasn't my biological father. I called Arthur at 3 a.m. He answered on the second ring, alert, as if he'd been waiting. "I found something," I said. "I need to see you. Now." Whitmore Tower was nearly empty at that hour. A skeleton security crew, cleaners working the lower floors, the hum of climate control systems maintaining perfect temperatures for no one. Arthur met me in his office, still dressed in a suit, a cup of coffee already waiting for me. I showed him the letter. His face didn't change as he read it, but something shifted in his eyes. Something heavy. "You knew," I said. "You knew I wasn't his biological daughter." Arthur set the letter down carefully. "Yes, since 1972. He moved to the window, his back to me. "Your mother had an affair. It started while James was deployed. By the time he came home, she was pregnant. She told him the baby was his and he believed her, wanted to believe her, because he loved her and he wanted a family. My legs gave out. I sank into the nearest chair. Who was he? My biological father. A man named Richard Holloway. He was a sales representative who traveled through the area regularly. The affair lasted about 6 months. When your mother found out she was pregnant, she ended things with Richard and convinced James the baby was his. Did Richard know? About me? Arthur turned. He died in 1989. Car accident. He never knew he had a daughter. I pressed my hands against my eyes, trying to stop the room from spinning. My entire life, everything I thought I knew about myself, was a lie. My mother's lie. James knew, Arthur continued quietly. Not at first, but later. When you were about 5, he ran into Richard at a conference, saw the resemblance. He confronted your mother and she admitted everything. He stayed. Because he loved you. Because as far as he was concerned, you were his daughter. Blood didn't matter. He raised you, cared for you, left his entire legacy to you. Arthur's voice hardened. And your mother used that love against him. She knew he'd never abandon you, so she knew she could do whatever she wanted. Have affairs, spend money, manipulate everyone around her. James suffered in silence because he couldn't bear to lose you. I thought about my father's eyes in those final years. The sadness I'd attributed to war trauma. The way he'd sometimes look at my mother with an expression I couldn't name. Now I could name it. Resignation. The look of a man trapped by his own decency. The trust, I said slowly. He left everything to me specifically. Not to my mother. Not to Kevin. Kevin is your mother's son from before her marriage to James. James adopted him legally, but he always knew Kevin wasn't committed to the family the way you were. The trust was his way of ensuring you'd be protected, that his legacy would go to the daughter he chose, even if biology hadn't. The daughter he chose. I started crying. Not dramatic sobs, just tears sliding down my face, unstoppable. My father had known the truth and loved me anyway, had sacrificed his own happiness to protect me, and my mother had repaid that sacrifice by stealing everything he'd left behind. Does this change the case? I asked when I could speak again. No. Arthur sat across from me. The trust was established for Samantha Reeves, James's legal daughter. Your mother's fraud, the forged documents, the conspiracy, none of that changes because of the circumstances of your birth. If anything, it makes her crimes worse. She didn't just steal from you. She betrayed a man who gave up everything for her. She'll use it, though. In court, she'll try to argue that I wasn't entitled to the inheritance. She can try. She'll fail. Arthur's voice was certain. James's intentions were clear. His will, his trust documents, his letters, everything specifies that Samantha Reeves is his heir. Biological parentage doesn't factor into legal inheritance when there's a clear written record. I wiped my eyes. I need to know more. About Richard Holloway, about my mother's affairs, about all of it. She's going to use this against me. I need to understand everything before she can weaponize it. Arthur nodded slowly. Then we dig deeper. But Samantha, he paused. Some truths, once uncovered, can't be unknown. Are you prepared for what else we might find? I thought about the woman in the courtroom, the contempt in her eyes, the threats that weren't quite threats. I've already lost everything she could take from me, I said. Whatever's left is just information. Arthur reached for his phone. Margaret, wake the investigators. We have new parameters for the research. He looked at me as he spoke. Find everything there is to know about Patricia Reeves. Every secret, every lie, every person she's ever betrayed. If your mother wants to make this about secrets, he said, then we'll make sure hers are exposed first. The secrets, it turned out, went deeper than anyone imagined. But I wouldn't learn that until the next morning, when Margaret arrived with a file marked confidential, multiple homicide investigation, and everything I thought I knew about my mother shattered completely. Margaret set the file on the conference table like it might explode. This came from a contact in the FBI's cold case division, she said. I want to be clear, none of this has been officially connected to your mother. But the patterns? I opened the file. The first page was a missing persons report from 1996. A woman named Eleanor Barnes, 67 years old, from Tucson. She disappeared without a trace. No body, no evidence of foul play. just gone. I don't understand, I said. What does this have to do with my mother? The next document was a property record. Eleanor Barnes had owned a house in Tucson, valued at $340,000 in 1996. 3 months after her disappearance, the house was sold. The buyer, Patricia Reeves. My mother had bought a missing woman's house. It gets worse, Margaret said. More documents. More missing persons reports. 3 women over a period of 8 years, all elderly, all living alone, all with substantial assets. All disappeared without explanation. And in each case, within months of the disappearance, a property or bank account connected to the victim had been acquired by someone in my mother's network. A shell company, a business associate, once, by Kevin directly. Eleanor Barnes, Martha Donovan, Catherine Price. Margaret listed the names like a eulogy. All presumed dead. No bodies ever found. No suspects ever identified. The cases went cold years ago. I stared at the files, at the photographs of smiling elderly women who'd vanished into nothing. You think my mother killed them? I think there's a pattern that warrants investigation. Margaret's voice was careful. I think your mother has connections to 3 unsolved disappearances, all involving vulnerable women with assets she subsequently acquired, and I think the FBI is very interested in exploring that connection. The room felt cold. I'd known my mother was a thief, a liar, a manipulator. But murder? There's more, Margaret continued. She pulled out another document, a transcript of a recorded conversation. This was obtained during the Brandon Mitchell interrogation. It's from a phone call between your mother and Kevin, made 2 years ago, approximately 1 week before your 30th birthday. Kevin: Mom, are you sure about this? Sam's going to ask questions eventually. She's not stupid. Patricia: She won't ask questions if she's too busy defending herself. We've done this before, Kevin. We know how to handle problems. Kevin: This is different. She's family. Patricia: Family doesn't mean anything. James taught me that. You give everything to someone, and they still find ways to disappoint you. Sam is no different than Eleanor or Martha or Catherine. She's an obstacle, and we know how to handle obstacles. Kevin: That was years ago. We were desperate then. Patricia: We're desperate now. The trust releases in a week. If we don't act, we lose everything. Are you with me or not? Kevin: Long pause. I'm with you. I'm always with you. Patricia: Good. Then we handle this the same way we handled the others. Make her disappear. Not physically, just socially. Destroy her credibility. Make sure no one believes a word she says. By the time she figures out what happened, it'll be too late. I set the transcript down. My hands were shaking. She compared me to them, I said. To the women who disappeared. She said they handled those problems the same way. The FBI is reopening all 3 cases, Margaret said. Based on this transcript and the financial connections, they have grounds for a full investigation. Your mother may be facing charges far more serious than fraud. I thought about Eleanor Barnes, 67 years old, living alone. Probably trusted the wrong person. Let them into her life. Never saw the danger until it was too late. That could have been me. If my mother had decided physical disappearance was easier than social destruction, I might be buried somewhere in the desert. Another cold case. Another name in a file. What do we do? I asked. Arthur spoke for the first time. He'd been standing by the window, listening, his face unreadable. We coordinate with the FBI, he said. Provide them with everything we have. Financial records, testimony, the connection between your family's sudden wealth and these disappearances. And we prepare for the possibility that this case is about to become much larger than anyone anticipated. My mother will fight back, I said. She's not going to let this happen quietly. She won't. Arthur turned to face me. Which is why we need to move carefully. Your mother still has allies, money hidden in places we haven't found, people who owe her favors or share her secrets. If we're going to ensure she faces justice, real justice for everything she's done, we need to be prepared for every contingency. Margaret nodded. I've already reached out to the U.S. Attorney's Office. Given the scope of potential charges, they're considering taking over the prosecution. Federal resources, federal investigators, federal prison if convicted, federal prison. My mother in a cell for the rest of her life. For fraud, for conspiracy, possibly for murder. Was that what I wanted? I looked at the photographs of Eleanor Barnes, Martha Donovan, Catherine Price, women who'd had lives, families, hopes for the future, women whose deaths, if they were dead, had never been acknowledged, never been mourned properly, because no one knew what had happened to them. That was what I wanted. Do it, I said, whatever it takes. The next 2 weeks were a controlled explosion of activity. FBI agents interviewed Brandon again, this time about anything he knew regarding the missing women. He claimed ignorance, and I believed him. Brandon was greedy and weak, but I didn't think he had the stomach for murder. But he provided more information about my mother's business dealings, her associates, her habits. Forensic accountants traced the money. The pattern was clear. Each of the 3 missing women had been wealthy, isolated, and childless. Perfect targets. Within months of their disappearances, their assets had been quietly absorbed into my mother's network through shell companies and fraudulent transfers. The amounts were staggering. Eleanor Barnes's estate had been worth $1.2 million, Martha Donovan's $890,000, Catherine Price's almost $2 million. Combined with my father's trust, my mother had stolen more than $6 million over 2 decades, and she'd done it without anyone noticing, without anyone questioning, without anyone caring enough about 3 elderly women to dig deeper. Arthur's team found something else, too. A storage unit in Mesa, registered to one of my mother's shell companies. Inside, boxes of documents, photographs, and personal effects that had belonged to the missing women, trophies. My mother had kept trophies. The FBI obtained a warrant. They found Eleanor Barnes's wedding ring in a velvet pouch, tucked between old tax returns and insurance documents. DNA testing confirmed it had been worn by Eleanor. The ring had never been reported missing because no one had known to look for it. My mother's attorney tried to explain it away. A coincidence. A purchase from an estate sale. There was no evidence that Patricia Reeves had ever met Eleanor Barnes, much less harmed her. But the pieces were falling into place. And my mother, sitting in her cell in Maricopa County, was starting to realize that the walls were closing in. She requested a meeting. With me. Alone. Absolutely not, Margaret said immediately. It's a manipulation tactic. She wants to intimidate you, threaten you, find out what you know. I know what she wants, I said, and I want to look her in the eye when I tell her it's over. Arthur studied me for a long moment. Are you sure? She spent 32 years lying to me. Lying about my father, lying about my identity, lying about everything. I need her to know that I see her, all of her, the real her, not the mask she wore for my whole life. The meeting was scheduled for Friday afternoon. I spent the days leading up to it preparing, not just emotionally, but strategically. Margaret and I reviewed every piece of evidence, every connection, every argument my mother might try to make. She'll try to gaslight you, Margaret warned, make you doubt what you know, make you feel like you're the one who's wrong. She's been doing that my whole life. It won't work anymore. She might threaten you, claim she has information that could hurt you, destroy you. The only secret she had was my parentage, and that doesn't change anything legally. She might try to make a deal, offer to return some of the money in exchange for you dropping the case. I laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. She can't return what she's already spent, and even if she could, it wouldn't bring back Eleanor Barnes. Friday arrived. I dressed carefully, professional, composed, armored. Margaret drove me to the jail. Arthur wanted to come, but I asked him to wait. This was something I needed to do myself. The visitation room was gray and sterile, plastic chairs bolted to the floor, a table with scratches and stains that had stories I didn't want to know. My mother was already there when they brought me in, wearing an orange jumpsuit, her hair unwashed, her face bare of makeup for the first time I could remember. She looked old, not elderly. She was only 64, but diminished. The power she'd always projected, the control she'd always maintained, had evaporated inside these walls. Samantha, her voice was hoarse. Thank you for coming. I sat across from her, said nothing. I know you think you understand what's happening, she continued, but you don't. You've been manipulated, sweetheart. Arthur Whitmore, his lawyers, they're using you. They want our family's money, our reputation. The word cut through her speech like a blade. She blinked. I know everything, I said. The trust, the forged documents, Kevin and Brandon and Gerald Foster and the Cayman Islands. I know about Richard Holloway. I know Dad wasn't my biological father. I leaned forward. And I know about Eleanor Barnes, Martha Donovan, Catherine Price. For the first time in my life, I saw my mother's composure crack completely. Real fear, naked and undisguised, flickered across her face. You don't know what you're talking about. We found the storage unit, Mother. We found Eleanor's wedding ring. The FBI is reopening all 3 cases. They're going to find those women, what's left of them, and when they do, you're going to spend the rest of your life in a federal prison. She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was different, harder, the mask she'd worn my whole life finally falling away. Your father was weak, she said. James, he loved you so much he couldn't see what you really were. A burden, a reminder of my mistake. I kept you because it was useful, not because I wanted you. I didn't flinch. I'd expected this. Those women were dying anyway, she continued. Alone, forgotten, wasting away in empty houses. I gave them purpose. Their money built something. It meant something. It meant you could buy a bigger house, send Kevin to private school, maintain the lifestyle you thought you deserved. I did deserve it. Her eyes blazed. I spent my whole life taking care of other people. Your father with his nightmares and his guilt, Kevin with his failures and his needs, you with your questions and your expectations. I was owed something for all of that. You were owed nothing. I stood, and now you'll get exactly what you deserve. I walked to the door, knocked for the guard. Samantha. Her voice stopped me. I turned. My mother was smiling. That thin, cruel smile I remembered from my childhood, the one that meant she knew something you didn't. You think you've won, she said. But you don't know about Eleanor's daughter. You don't know what really happened. And when that truth comes out, and it will, you'll wish you'd never started this. The guard opened the door. I walked out without looking back, but her words echoed in my mind the whole drive home. What truth was still waiting to be found? The words wouldn't leave me alone. I'd assumed Eleanor Barnes was childless. The missing persons report said so, and childless victims had been part of my mother's pattern. But my mother had smiled when she said it, that specific smile that meant she was holding a card I couldn't see. I called Margaret that night. Eleanor Barnes, I said. The report says she had no children. Are we sure that's accurate? A pause. I'll have the investigators verify. The answer came the next morning. Eleanor Barnes had, in fact, had a daughter, born in 1952, given up for adoption at birth. Eleanor had been 19, unmarried, and her family had insisted. The adoption had been closed, the record sealed, and Eleanor had never spoken publicly about the child she'd lost. But she'd searched for her. For 40 years, Eleanor had hired private investigators, submitted DNA samples to databases, followed every lead. The search had consumed her, and her money. By the time she disappeared in 1996, she'd spent over $200,000 trying to find a daughter who'd been raised by another family under another name. Did she find her? I asked. Margaret's voice was careful. That's where it gets complicated. According to Eleanor's financial records, she received a letter 3 weeks before her disappearance. The letter isn't in the files, but there's a notation. Reunion scheduled, finally. She'd found her daughter. Who was it? Who did she find? We're still working on that. The adoption records from 1952 are sealed, and getting them opened requires a court order. But Samantha, Margaret hesitated. Your mother mentioned Eleanor's daughter as if it were relevant to you, as if there's a connection. I felt cold. You think my mother knew the daughter? I think your mother knows things we haven't uncovered yet, and I think we need to find out what before she can use it against you. The court order came through 48 hours later. Arthur's legal team had pulled every string available, citing the murder investigation and the urgent need for information. The sealed adoption records from 1952 were delivered to Margaret's office in a manila envelope. I was there when she opened it. The documents were old, the paper yellowed and brittle. The language was formal, clinical, describing the relinquishment of parental rights by Eleanor Marie Barnes, age 19, for a female infant born on March 14, 1952. The adoptive parents were listed as Harold and Mary Holloway of Tucson, Arizona. I grabbed the file, read it again, and again. Richard Holloway, I said. My biological father. His parents adopted Eleanor Barnes's daughter in 1952. Margaret was already on the phone, calling the investigators. 20 minutes later, we had the full picture. Richard Holloway had been raised with a sister named Susan. According to the adoption records, Susan Holloway had been born on March 14, 1952, and adopted by Harold and Mary Holloway as an infant. She'd grown up in Tucson, married young, had 2 children, and lived a quiet life. Susan Holloway was Eleanor Barnes's biological daughter, and Richard Holloway, the man who'd had an affair with my mother, the man who was my biological father, had been Susan's adoptive brother, which meant Eleanor Barnes, the woman my mother had almost certainly murdered, was connected to my family in ways no one had imagined. Your mother knew, Margaret said. She must have known. The connection between Richard and Susan, between Eleanor and the Holloway family, she knew all of it. But why would that matter? I was still trying to process the implications. Why would my mother care about Eleanor Barnes's connection to Richard? Because of the inheritance, Margaret said slowly. Eleanor was searching for her daughter. She'd spent a fortune trying to find Susan. When she finally located her, she probably planned to leave her estate to Susan, her biological child. And my mother was already stealing from Eleanor by then. Exactly. If Eleanor had lived to change her will, Susan would have inherited everything. Your mother would have lost access to over $1 million in assets. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. My mother had discovered the connection between Eleanor and Richard. She'd realized that Eleanor's search for her daughter threatened her scheme, so she'd made Eleanor disappear, permanently, before she could reconnect with Susan and change her estate plans. And then, years later, my mother had had an affair with Richard Holloway, Eleanor's daughter's adoptive brother, a man whose family had unknowingly been touched by my mother's crimes. Does Susan know? I asked. Does she know her biological mother was murdered? We need to tell her, Margaret said. And we need to find out if she knows anything else. Anything that might help the case. Susan Holloway, now Susan Patterson, was 72 years old, living in a retirement community in Sedona. Margaret arranged a meeting, explaining only that we had information about her biological mother's disappearance. Susan agreed immediately. We drove to Sedona that afternoon. The retirement community was beautiful. Red rock formations rising in the distance, manicured gardens, cheerful staff members greeting residents by name. Susan met us in a private sitting room, her white hair neatly styled, her hands clutching a cup of tea. I've waited almost 30 years for someone to tell me what happened to her, she said. I found out about Eleanor just a few weeks before she vanished. We were supposed to meet. I drove to Tucson, went to her house, and she was just gone. I let Margaret do the talking, explaining the investigation, the financial connections, the evidence pointing toward my mother as the person responsible for Eleanor's disappearance. Susan listened without interrupting. Tears rolled down her cheeks, silent and steady. I knew, she said when Margaret finished. I knew in my heart that someone had taken her. Eleanor was so excited to meet me. She'd spent her whole life looking. She wouldn't have just vanished. I'm so sorry, I said, for what my mother did, for all of it. Susan's eyes found mine. You're Patricia's daughter, but you're not like her. It wasn't a question. You're here, telling me the truth, trying to get justice for a woman you never knew. She deserved better. They all did. Susan reached across the table and took my hand. Her grip was firm despite her age. Your mother visited me, she said, about a year after Eleanor disappeared. She said she was a friend of Richard's, wanted to offer her condolences about his death. I didn't think anything of it at the time. Her voice hardened. Now I realized she was checking. making sure I didn't know anything that could threaten her. Did she say anything else? She asked about Eleanor, whether I'd ever found her, whether I knew anything about her estate. I told her I'd never met Eleanor, that she'd disappeared before we could meet. Susan's eyes narrowed. She seemed relieved. At the time, I thought she was just being sympathetic. Now I understand what that relief really meant. Margaret made notes. Susan's testimony was circumstantial, but it established that my mother had been aware of Susan's existence and had actively monitored whether she'd discovered anything about Eleanor. "There's one more thing," Susan said. She stood and walked to a bookshelf, retrieving a small wooden box. "Eleanor sent this to me a week before she disappeared. I think she knew something was wrong. She wanted me to have it, just in case." She opened the box. Inside was a USB drive, ancient by current standards, probably from the mid-90s, and a handwritten letter. "I've never been able to read the drive," Susan said. "The technology is too old, but the letter haunts me." She handed it to me. Eleanor's handwriting was elegant, flowing. "If you're reading this, something has happened to me. There's a woman, Patricia Reeves, who has been watching me, following me. I've tried to tell the police, but they think I'm a paranoid old woman. I don't have proof, but I believe Patricia has done this before. To other women like me, alone, vulnerable, with money she wants. I've documented everything I know on this drive. Bank records, photographs, dates, and times when I saw her near my house. It may not be enough, but it's something. I'm so sorry we never got to meet. I've loved you my whole life, even when I didn't know your name. Your mother, Eleanor." My hands were trembling when I finished reading. Eleanor had known. She'd known my mother was coming for her, and she'd tried to leave evidence behind. "We need to get this drive analyzed," Margaret said, her voice tight. "If Eleanor documented Patricia's surveillance, that's premeditation. That's first-degree murder." Susan handed over the drive without hesitation. "Find out what happened to her. Find out where she is. I want to bring her home." We drove back to Phoenix in silence. The USB drive sat in Margaret's briefcase like a bomb waiting to go off. The technicians worked through the night. The drive was corrupted, degraded by time, but not beyond recovery. By morning, they'd extracted the files, photographs, documents, and a single audio recording. I listened to the recording with Arthur and Margaret in the conference room at Whitmore Tower. Eleanor's voice, older and slightly wavering, filled the room. "This is Eleanor Barnes. The date is March 3rd, 1996. I'm recording this because I'm afraid. Patricia Reeves has been watching my house. I've seen her car parked on my street 4 times this week. She approached me at the grocery store yesterday, pretending to bump into me accidentally, but I recognized her. She's the same woman who called me 3 months ago, claiming to be a financial advisor. I believe Patricia is responsible for Martha's disappearance. Martha Donovan was my friend, and she vanished 2 years ago under similar circumstances. Same pattern, a woman approaching her, offering help with her finances, and then nothing. Martha was never found. I've gathered everything I could find: bank records showing suspicious transactions, photographs of Patricia near my house, a list of other women in the area who've disappeared over the past decade. If something happens to me, please give this to the police. Please don't let her get away with it. I just want to see my daughter. That's all I want. Please." The recording ended. Arthur reached over and stopped the playback. The room was silent. "She knew," I said. "She knew everything, and my mother killed her anyway." "We have enough," Margaret said. "Eleanor's recording, the financial evidence, Brandon's testimony, the items from the storage unit. We have enough to charge Patricia Reeves with murder." I looked at the window. The sun was rising over Phoenix, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. "Then let's end this," I said. "Once and for all." The next morning, federal agents arrived at Maricopa County Jail with a warrant for Patricia Reeves's arrest on 3 counts of first-degree murder. I wasn't there to see it, but Margaret was. She told me my mother didn't scream or cry or protest. That same thin, cruel smile she'd worn my whole life. She said something as they let her out, Margaret told me later. She said, "Tell Samantha this isn't over. Tell her I still have secrets. Tell her the truth about her father, her real father, is worse than she can imagine." I didn't believe her. I couldn't believe her anymore. Every word from her mouth was designed to manipulate, to control, to wound. But late that night, alone in my apartment, I wondered, what truth was she still hiding, and how much more damage could it cause? The trial lasted 4 weeks. I attended every day, sitting in the gallery behind the prosecution table, watching my mother's life dismantled piece by piece. The evidence was overwhelming. Eleanor's recording, the financial records, Brandon's testimony, the items from the storage unit. The defense tried to argue contamination, coercion, circumstantial connections. None of it stuck. On the 15th day, the FBI announced they'd found remains. A construction crew excavating land for a new development in the desert east of Tucson had uncovered human bones. DNA testing confirmed what we'd suspected. Eleanor Barnes, Martha Donovan, and Catherine Price had all been buried within a quarter mile of each other, in shallow graves marked by nothing but sagebrush and stone. They'd been there for decades, waiting to be found, waiting for someone to care enough to look. Susan Patterson flew in from Sedona for the identification. She was quiet, composed. But I saw her hands shake when the medical examiner confirmed that the remains included a small gold locket, Eleanor's locket, the one she'd worn in every photograph from her adult life. "She can come home now," Susan said. Her voice cracked. Finally. My mother showed no emotion when the discovery was announced in court. She sat